This is truly a one-of-a-kind experience. I'm here to talk about marketing. So I'll give you a little bit of background about me, give you an idea of what we were going to talk through, and I do have little slides as a crutch. It keeps me honest, otherwise I'll ramble, and I want to make sure I can impart all the things that are helpful and maybe things that you can question as well. All right, so here I am, field trip department. Get a little bit of background. So I work as a fractional CMO, which means fractional chief marketing officer. I know there's a lot of acronyms. But I have the benefit of working with a handful of different financial firms. A lot of wealth advisors, asset managers, fintech, B2B, some tech. My background was often working with bigger agencies or part of Bloomberg on large brands. And so what I love to do is take these same principles that big brands get to benefit from and apply them for growth stage companies, specifically for growth stage in finance. And so having the benefit of working with multiple companies, I get to see the good, the bad, the ugly, the things that are helpful, the things that are really a priority, the things that maybe, as John Renz, who was a speaker a couple while ago, maybe you reserve for a second or third level of maturity. Really, this is going to be about the foundational elements, but they're principles that apply to any stage of company, but it's really at that transformative period when either you've been in business for a few years and you're looking to get to that next stage of growth, or you're starting to flatline and want to figure out how do you go beyond traditional organic business or those original referrals. What are these real priorities? And that's where a fractional model tends to come in, because I'm there to be part of that leadership team, that fiduciary responsibility. I'm part of that organization, really there to listen, to diagnose, to prioritize, and recommend what is a customized strategic roadmap for them. There are certain things that most firms really need, and so that's what we'll go through today. The first thing I want to ask everyone, this will do a little bit of audience participation, is I want to see how many people you think when a financial advisor meets with an ultra-high net worth client. When that ultra-high net worth client is considering advisors, how many are they talking to prior to deciding who to hire? So I'll start with one. A show of hands. All right, I see maybe two people. All right, two advisors. All right, we're, 5 or 6 people. 3 advisors. All right, everyone goes for C in the multiple choice category. 4, 5 or more. All right, yeah, there's not a lot of people who buy 10 pairs of shoes and only keep one. The answer was actually very surprising to me. The answer is 1. 57% of people work with the first advisor they meet. That means there's a lot riding on that. And often, maybe those relationships don't last. They're giving their entire nest egg to the first person they talk to. So what that really means is there is a huge amount of pressure to land that first interaction. And I talked to a bunch of advisors sharing that stat, and one thing that they told me is when I get that opportunity, it's not for me to win, it's for me not to fuck up. And so ultimately, we have to get that one impression so that when they arrive and they're interested, it's yours to get. But it doesn't mean that it starts there. You want to work backwards. So I'll begin the little story. I recently moved from New York and Jersey City out to the suburbs. I took the plunge. I needed space. And so I met a bunch of dads in the area. We joined this Westfield Pickleball Dads. We went out and played every Thursday. And that was the reason to join. But the true benefit was obviously the community and the text chain. The text chain of 40 guys who are all ripping on each other, talking about football or fantasy. But they're also our little in-house Yelp, where anytime we need an electrician, a landscaper, we're all guys who are really at the same stage. We all got young kids, pretty middle of our careers. And so, this is who we turn to for advice. And so when you're on that chain and someone says hey, I'm looking for an attorney or I'm looking for an advisor, you want someone to respond really quickly and passionately of I love this advisor, here is why, and then, 2 or 3 might follow. So you're getting maybe those 2 to 3 opportunities in that referral. We know 70% of most growth is coming from referrals. Certainly it can scale beyond that. But if you're getting 2 to 3, that process is going to get down to 1. So what usually happens is those individuals, they look at the names, they go to the website, they open them up, and then it's an exercise in trying to remove tabs. Generally, people don't want to spend a lot of time on websites. They want to see pretty quickly, is this a person that's relevant to me? Do they understand how I think, where I am in life? Do they get me? Do I trust them? Is it credible? It's about a 52-second test. That's the average time that someone spends on a website. So if you got one opportunity, you have 52 seconds to nail that moment. So what I want to talk about then is how do we think about that moment of truth and all of the subsequent actions that follow after. So here's a simple mantra. I'm trying to translate brand language into really normal language. It's be memorable and have your shit together. Ultimately, this is about brand building and all of the growth, marketing, and life cycle infrastructure. Once we can understand the strategy and these true foundational elements, then we can talk about really what to prioritize, what to do first, second, and so on. And then also, I think very importantly for these growth stage companies, how to think about staffing it. How do we want to invest? How do we think about marketing as an expense? What to think about? What's the ROI that we can expect and why to justify it? And then also, what are the options of staffing things, both internally and externally? But I want to start with be memorable because this is going to create the most long-term impact. And this comes down to branding. And I know talking to a lot of very quantitative financial people, everyone wants to question what is the true impact of branding. They call it squishy, unverified, it's fluffy. Branding works. And I'm going to show overwhelming evidence just to remove any doubts that this is not a worthwhile investment because it is the thing that is going to impact everything else you do from a marketing organization going forward. So I'm going to bombard you with quick stats. You don't have to memorize all these things, but just to prove this out without a shadow of a doubt. 1, 87% of institutional investors say a brand reputation is either critically important or important when making a key commercial decision. This is true if it's an institutional investor or it's a retail investor. Brand, more than anything, is the easiest thing to, you get a feeling, an experience. This is the thing that's going to make them comfortable moving forward. I'll throw more evidence here. So chart on the left is from Greenwich Associates. It actually looks at a term called brand alpha. And brand alpha is the delta between when you are aware of a brand and when you get a solicitation, the increase in that consideration. And if you're more aware of that brand, you have upwards of 20 to 30% more likely to respond or to go forward in that opportunity. Take another example, Australian insurance brands. I don't know how many of you are out there, but there was a study by a very credible organization called the Ehrenberg Bass Institute that all is about the science of branding that looks at the increase in memory as a function of revenue and of share of market. The more memorable a brand, the more likely it is to perform. And if you don't trust Australian insurance companies, McKinsey might be a little more credible. They did a 20-year study looking at the top 40 brands from Interbrand as they perform against the total and the MSCI world market, and those were upwards of 96% overperforming when you have a strong brand. So let's talk about why these brands make a difference and what is the codes to it. It's all about memorability. And the question that really comes down to is, what do you want to be known for? I think this is the simplest, cleanest way when you think about your business. When you want to work backwards from what do you want people to say about you, what do you want to be known for is the ultimate question we have to answer. There's a lot of other ways that people talk about this. Jeff Bezos says your brand is what people say about you when you leave the room. Ultimately, your brand is in the hands of your clients, of their referrals. They're going to think something. They're going to say something. It's not going to be the exact same thing you say, but if you can work backwards from that moment, cultivating that story, building the infrastructure to make sure that story lands on a frequent basis, you're going to get credit for the thing you wish you want to be known for, and that's going to be passed on. So a little bit of a framework we use in classic brand strategy of how we can identify that statement. 3 overlapping circles. So first, your brand is that defining thing that you do exceptionally well. So when you think about your business, what is it that you really think is different, is really special, is your special sauce? When you talk to someone, it's the thing that really conveys your commitments, your frameworks, your personality. That's going to be the starting place. And spend time self-reflecting, do stakeholder conversations, really think critically about what is your truth and what you do well. The next, spend time with your audience. This is probably like the biggest mistake that every brand does is they don't do enough research by talking to their customers. Ask the questions you wish you knew. Ultimately, what you want to get to is what is the thing they wish was possible, what's the desire, and what's that unmet need. And if you understand that tension, you can figure out what they want what they want in life, what are their fears, their anxieties, their wishes, and you'll get to something that is really distinct for that audience and be very focused on that audience. That's the other challenge at growth stage companies is audience prioritization. You just want to get leads, you want to get business, but there isn't necessarily a focus on who that audience is. It doesn't have to be a demographic. It could be psychological. It could be a life stage. It could be about people selling their business and like have insecurities about what they're doing going forward. It could be about nearing retirement and they're not sure if they want to have enough to go on. But there's probably some defining quality that's going to be the thing that you hit on. That's what you choose to define as an audience. And then the last step is when you know how to marry that brand strategy with that audience problem, how do you do it in a distinct way? And seeing hundreds and hundreds of advisors' websites, this is where there's a lot of room for improvement. There's a lot of conventions that exist in this category. So there's an exercise called convention hunting. I encourage everyone to do it. Just go to maybe 10, 20 advisors. They could be in your area. They could be national. And just look at the first page of that website and just start to bucket all the themes you see. And there's certainly going to be these recurring statements. So on a messaging front, it's like, oh, you're unique. We customize plans around you, or we're going to be around with you for the long-term journey, or we're going to realize your financial dreams and your future. And though it's the same cliche imagery, and I apologize in advance if anyone have these things, but winding roads, mountaintops, sailboats, couples on the beach, coffee mugs, the advisor sitting across from the client, there's enough of this where on the immediate 52-second test, people are going to be like, nope, this is no different than the rest. Why do I need to get in touch? Move on. So if you can figure out that unique way, both in what you say and the visual codes, that's how you create that lasting memory, the one that's going to break through from an existing client and show to the new ones, hey, this is someone I want to talk to. All right, so I got a few examples of like what you want to be known for. These are ones that I've worked on. Not saying these are the end-all perfect industry-leading examples. They're just ones that I can point to and say, where do we start versus where we were going? So this was a Sage Mountain. This is an advisory based in Atlanta. Part of the problem they had is they always talk about the magic they had in the room they couldn't convey when they were in person with clients. I think you'll probably hear it a lot too. You're great in person, but that story doesn't always last. It doesn't always transcend when you're not there. And so for them, the whole idea was, you're about personal care and attention and responsiveness. How do we make you look like you're this exclusive, invitation-only hospitality business? How do we take, if you're the Nordstroms or Amazon Black Card of a ultra-high net worth advisory? It's a very different point of view than just trying to say, we try harder or we care more. How do you prove it? How do you create an attitude around it? So PFG, this is a private credit firm. Previously they had a risk perception of doing high-risk deals in emerging markets. And instead, how do you flip the story on that one? So here, we go where the entrepreneurs are. It's about not trying to find emerging markets. It's about going where innovation is happening. And wherever it is emerging, that's where we'll be there. It's a very different story, and it changes the appetite to channel partners, and it shifts perceptions to investors on what that means. And then you change everything across websites and collateral and social. But once you have that clear, defining North Star, it makes it so much easier to carry everything forward. Wellspring Capital, this is an alternative asset manager. They do a lot of really interesting, sophisticated, but often one-off products. So how do you change that and make it about a philosophy? Engineers are alpha, generating alpha through anomalies. So now there's a point of view, so that no matter what product comes next, there's some distinction. All right, so once you got that brand, honestly, that's going to be one of the biggest lifts, because it's going to make all the work you do after far easier. And it's all going to be connected. So start with the brand. You're going to end up needing to prove that on the website. You got to pass that 52-second test. See that through on collateral, and think about the journey of everyone that you're going to encounter when you talk to a client. From the first time you get that referral, what's the outreach look like? Whether it's initial email on an inbound and how you automate that process. Whether it's the pitch deck or it's the onboarding experience. All of these are ways to prove what it's like to be working with you. I think a CRM and an email system goes a long way. There's some great ones out there, in finance and just across B2B, where it's just going to do some of the things that as humans we all forget. you've got a lot of prospects. Maybe it wasn't right for them, but you don't know when they're going to be in market again. There's this 95-5 rule that 95% of the time most customers are not in purchase mode, but 5% of the time they are. So how do you stay relevant when you don't know when that next opportunity is going to be? And so good practices of like an ongoing newsletter, not the sexiest thing, and you don't need to make it so sophisticated. There's almost too much effort putting in. But the regularity and the frequency of it, that's going to keep you honest, and it's going to find enough opportunities to land whenever the timing is right. Also, really simple automations. There's a lot of more sophisticated things out there, but you can find out if you have a prospect, they've been to your site, you get a notification. Or let's say you send an email. Who opens it? How many times do they open it? Did they send it to someone? Did they read it? Really basic stuff that you can arm your advisors with, like, hey, this person is like really interested in our stuff. You had to send it out there. Why don't we get in touch? That's going to help convert some of the easier leads that you have or prospects you've already talked to, just the timing wasn't right. MarTech is another certainly great investment, especially if you're trying to understand your prospecting or you're building this right HubSpot and some of these performance data so you can measure properly. And the last thing, there's the question mark, is the shiny objects. There's just a lot of effort that can be put into things like social or podcasts or SEO or PR, and usually some of these are symptomatic of not having the brand in place. Sometimes people think they need PR because they don't really need to articulate and understand what their story is. You figure out the story, it's going to make PR easier. SEO, do you get a lot of business through inbound referrals? If you don't, maybe that's not the thing that you need to prioritize. There's a lot of great podcasts out there, and when you do it with enough consistency, you can command an audience. There's also a lot of podcasts that have 2 to 3 listeners, and it's really questioning, like, is it worth a lot of that effort? Sometimes that can be the thing that you're known for, is you're a really good financial educator, or you're really good at connecting on a human level and talking about what money means. That might be your thing, but I think it's going to start when you have a clear brand story, and that's how you're going to bring it to life when you're at that stage of maturity. All right, so then how do we view marketing? So if we know we have this strategy and this plan in place, how do we want to approach it? So the first is be iterative, not perfect. And what that means is branding is something that I often hear, like, yeah, we'll get to it in a couple years, we got other priorities. Instead of trying to make it perfect in a vacuum and going away for a year, just make iterative improvements. If you have a new way of phrasing things, if you can change the imagery on a website, if you can start doing some initial newsletters, get it going right away, you'll eventually get there together. This is kind of that startup agile mode approach. That brand building, it's going to last 10 years. Treat it as a long-term investment. On the budgeting side, I know that's going against some of the previous myths that were busted earlier, but people like to know a number of how much to spend. 5 to 15% is a good one. Might be on the higher end initially in that upfront year where you're creating a brand that you love. And then the last thing I want to talk about is who to hire, thinking about this externally or internally. So a few different options in there. There's the DIYer. That's if you try to do everything yourself. My best advice there is people come to you to manage their money for a reason. Marketing is an expertise. Maybe think the same advice. There's the junior, someone who likes to do marketing. Marketing is not a thing you do. This is a practice that takes expertise and experience and skill. And what's going to end up happening is, you're going to be very strategic, not going to be very strategic, too much, because it's too focused on an execution. Full-timers are wonderful, but this business is about peaks and valleys. In a rebranding year, you need a lot of time and a lot of effort. That next year, you're not going to need that so much. So it might not make sense to hire someone full-time when it's a peak and valley role, or you need lots of different discipline help. Because of that lots of discipline help, you have agencies and vendors. Agencies are great. There's a lot of wonderful ones, a lot of ones here. They need management because they're excellent at execution, but they need time on your side to tell them exactly what you need, so you have to set that strategy for them. And there's also, coming from an agency background, be a little aware, sometimes the people you work with up front might not be the team you end up with working long term. They have a lot of staff, they think about things based on the skill set they have, so they tend to have a bias towards certain disciplines, so they might not approach things in an objective way. Vendors often can be great for MarTech, but when you're trying to do a custom brand, tend to think through a templated-based strategy because they have to do things at scale in order to maximize the same solution across multiple clients. The last model is what I do. Certainly a little biased, but having come from many of these, I think it works well, is the fractional role, where you get the benefit of someone thinking like an insider with senior experience, but they can curate teams around them and figure out the right makeup of that solution. So there is that leadership, there is the right strategy and prioritization, but you know what, you do an engagement up front in the transformation period, then you finish it, you close it, and you go to implementation mode with a lighter team. So different considerations, not saying there's any right or wrong, but as you think about the maturity of building your firm, you know, there's a lot of great solutions out there. With that, I'm over time. I appreciate throwing everything there is at the wall in front of you. Happy to help and answer any questions.